Welcome to Moment the Other Way, a podcast about your journey and finances. I'm your host, James. In today's episode, we have Wanda and Peggy with us to discuss budgeting. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Okay, so one of the things that comes up with young people, actually millennials and Gen X, is this idea of sticking to a budget. And I need help to stick to a budget. And I personally can't believe how many new apps there are about budgets, right? Rocket Money has it, Mint has it. Somebody was just telling me about a new one. I don't know if you know any more, James. Intuit, I think, has one.
Yeah, they're in the same family, I feel like,
Yeah,
of all these
yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah.
apps.
Yeah, everybody wants to tell you how to stick to a budget. And I thought, well, gosh, how is it that you can stick to a budget? And so I think one of the things, and it's one of the things I'm talking about a lot, is this exhale. So exhale, right? And consider where you are right now today in your life, whatever's going on. Exhale. And this is the framework that you're going to use for your budget. And when you think about a budget, the first thing that comes out of your income, of course, is going to be taxes, and that's going to be 7%. And so that brings to mind, or about 7%, plus, the federal taxes and plus your state taxes. So that brings to mind that you're paying, somewhere between, 7 and 30% to federal taxes. And then maybe you can think about your budget in terms of a percentage. I was thinking, oh, hey, a percentage might be a good way of looking at it. And so, well, then what are good percentages for different things, So, hey, I make $1,000 a month, right? About 150 going over 15% towards my taxes. That gives me about 85% to work with. If I'm saying I want to work with percentages. And we've talked a little bit about savings, and we've talked about savings being somewhere around 5 to 10%. That gives 80% to work with. And then generally about 30% is going to be your housing, right? And so now you're down to 50% to work with. And then statistically, the USDA tells us that we spend about 15% on groceries, right? That leaves 35% left to work with, which is kind of a scary number. If I'm bringing in $1,000, that means I have about $350 a month to work with.
Yeah.
So you can take that percentage, right, and kind of translate it into dollar amount and say, this is what I have to work with. Yikes. And you kind of stay in that lane where you're thinking about percentages and go that route. And then the other route you can do is by dollar amount. How many dollars am I spending to these various things? Again, using that example, $350, right? That gives us about, just less than $100 a week for everything.
Yeah.
So
That's pretty hard, I feel like, in today's world, unless you live in somewhere pretty rural and economical, as you like to say.
yeah.
I can tell you from firsthand, like my wife and I, in terms of how we try to budget, it's hard. It's hard,
Yeah.
especially as prices are like inflating. Like
Right.
groceries, for instance, have
Yeah.
gone up. It's difficult to budget, and
Yeah.
it's hard to stick to it because every time we go somewhere, we end up spending about 20% more than we expected.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to stick to a budget's not easy. And so I guess my question that goes from this is, at what point does someone need to bring in outside help to help them get their budget in order?
Yeah. I think outside help is always, it takes the emotion away. Always outside help takes the emotion away. And I was thinking about the simplified example of that person who's bringing in $1,000 a month and has about $350 to work with. I forgot one of the other big expenses people have, which is transportation, which is generally around 10%, they say, of a monthly budget. And so that takes it down to $250 a month, right? And so about $60 a week, which is not a lot, considering that a coffee at Starbucks costs $6, right? I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I know we talked in our paying off debt podcast about,
Mm-hmm.
determining wants versus needs. And maybe Peggy, if you want to kind of go into this, because I know you had talked pretty heavily on defining what is a want versus what is a need, and where this might help to have an outside party help look through wants and needs.
Well, yes, but I think that you keep saying, and a lot of people keep saying, stick to your budget, stick to your budget, stick to your budget. But I don't think of a budget like that at all. I think of the budget as a tool and a knowledge based thing. So I don't put that pressure on, like, okay, well, you have this $10 to spend on this one thing, right? And you got to make sure you stick to that. I look at it like you need to know what your income and your expenditures are. So it's knowledge, right? So I feel like the first thing that you have to do when it comes to set your budget is to sit down and find out, okay, well, what are the inputs and what are the outputs and what are obviously the wants and the needs. So everything that Wanda talked about previously here has been needs, right? I mean, I don't think
Hmm.
that you mentioned anything except for the bare minimum needs. And and so that's good, right? You have those needs. And then after that, you look at your wants. But I mean, the first thing that I would do would be to just look at your expenditures. We talked in our previous podcast about looking through your bank statement and whatever you're using to pay for everything, looking through that and just seeing what you're spending. I mean, that's the first step for me. And if you're going to do a budget, so before I would start putting restrictions, because when you say stick to, that means you're restricting yourself in some way.
Hmm.
So before I would put restrictions, I would get the knowledge of what's actually happening, and then start talking about, okay, well, this is a want, and maybe we should restrict it to whatever.
That we should be looking more as knowledge. Now, the words that people use, as a matter of fact, are stick to budget. It's like this thing of a stick to a diet.
But it's
Right.
negative, right?
It's
So then you
negative.
got this instant negative thing, and people don't want to sit down with you to talk about something that is negative like that.
Right.
So
Right.
That's true.
I try to do it like it's a living document and it's knowledge. And first we need to know. So before that's what I'm saying. I would go about it from the other direction a little bit and not make it this, we're going to give you a budget and you're going to stick to it.
Well, I think
to.
I think there's
Mhm.
something
Mhm.
interesting about that because you have to build a foundation of some sort before you put in any like measures, right? So
Mhm.
if you don't have a foundation of understanding what's happening, how are you
Right.
supposed to be able to put things into place?
Right.
My question that I have about this is because we talked about wants versus needs, what happens in the case like Wanda, as you're talking about, where all of your necessary expenses are eating up pretty much all of your cash flow here. There's really nothing left over for discretionary.
No.
What do you
Okay. So
do in
wait.
that situation?
So I got a picture in my head, right? And both of you are talking about it. It's this idea of foundation and knowledge here versus this idea of sticking to a budget, if we can think of it in that way, like a foundation. And then that gives you the liberty to work in all this other space, right? If we know what this foundation consists of, then we have freedom to be in this other space. I think this way, stepping back even a little bit more and saying what's important to you. I wonder also, at the same time we're working on this foundation, and we can decide what's important to you. Is it important to you to go to a concert, to have coffee with your friends, to go to a restaurant? How important are these things to you? Because that's part of that knowledge, I think, determining what makes you happy, what makes your heart sing. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And to answer your question, James, I mean, obviously, if you have a client or a person, right, that has a budget and they're actually negative in their budget with their
Hmm.
needs, well, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to have to make some hard choices, right? And I don't think that's necessarily a place that you want to just like start from and start the conversation. Yes, there are people out there that have that and they do need help, and sometimes you have to make hard choices. Maybe you need to look for a better paying job, or maybe you need to move out of the place that you're living into a less expensive one. So, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's going to be something that you're going to run into a lot. There are a lot of people in the United States that are very at the minimum and just getting by. But they still need to have the knowledge and understand that, because there are people out there that don't understand why they're so stressed and why they're so, having such a hard time. And then when you actually say, okay, let's look at this and sit
Hmm.
down and look at it, you may find that they're negative cash. And then you have to have hard conversations like, well, maybe, that car you bought last year, that kind of thing.
Stop talking about me like that. So it's interesting though, you talk about it as a hard conversation. And one of the things I struggle with is I talk to people about a cash flow. And I've told you I can't stand this word budget because it sounds very restricting what it is that you cannot do. And if, to answer James' question, if you are in that space where you're looking at your numbers and saying you're in a negative territory every day, every month, then I think that's the time that you need to hire a professional to help you walk through your decisions or what the possibilities are for you. That's the time to hire a professional. And it's well worth the money that you might spend on hourly rate talking to a financial professional. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to hire them, but can help you negotiate the decision about what it is that you can do so that you, again, can have a solid foundation moving forward. Okay, and make decisions about what it is that you need to do. And that's going to help take away stress because okay, these are the things I need to do or I can do, and these are my options. And then they have all these tools that I find that people are using, Mint and all the budget tools out there, and they're using the tools but they're not making the decisions and the choices. They're spending all this time in this area without then stepping back and making the choices about what it is they can and cannot do or what they will and they won't do. And no one says it has to be a stick to a budget, but have this foundation and then build on it. And then you have the freedom, what it is that you can and can't do and what kind of life you'll have, right? Finances for real life. I want you to have a life. So don't let this kind of stress about sticking to a budget not allow you to have the life, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think too that leads into we're not going to talk about every single penny necessarily. Right.
Right.
So, we're not going to say, oh my goodness, you can't have that $5.49 on your Starbucks. Because that's another thing I think that people really feel like we're going to do when we say we're going to go over your budget. But you're right, we do tend to say cash flow instead because it doesn't have as much negative. And also it's, we don't want to know every 20 cents that you're spending. It's not necessarily helpful. And again, that negative restriction, thing about sticking to your budget. And we're not judging you. Everybody has different amounts of money that they spend on different things. Everybody's in a different place. And like Wanda said, what's important to you may not be important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's me and that's you. And we're different people and we have different wants. We have different needs. So I think that's an important thing too, that people understand. We're not judging you because that we have had clients where you sit down, you're doing a budget. And then when you look at the bank statement to go over the budget, it's like, okay, well, we didn't talk about this. And what is this $350 here?
Yeah.
Right. Because they didn't want to tell us because maybe they were embarrassed about what it was purposes and they thought that we were going to think it was frivolous. But maybe it's just them. Right. So that's how we're not judging what you're spending your money on. That's not our job. Our job is to help you achieve your goals and get you into a place for your future and now.
Well, this kind of leads into another thing because we talked, Wanda, you had mentioned all these budgeting apps, and we've talked about building a foundation versus just setting things into place. Having a financial advisor come in to help some people who might have low to negative cash flow might say, well, this is just another expense that I can't afford to do, and it's cheaper to use just a budgeting app. Where could you speak into that, where it might be useful to have a financial advisor at least help, and then taking that bigger expense, even if you don't really have the space for it, I feel like.
Right. If you're in negative territory, taking the extra expense and spending it wisely in a place that can get you to a better position is an expense that I would say is well worth it. So I think the most important thing a financial advisor can do in this situation actually is help you see and determine what's important in your life. And then once you can find out or see and understand what's important, again, it's not for us to say, hey, this is what your life should look like. This is my life. That's your life. All we're trying to do is get clarity on what's important to you. And then in finding that, right, then we can then look and see what's happening and then see what actions you're taking in your own life, and do they reflect what's important to you? And then from here, then changing actions in your life, the things that you're doing, right? And taking steps to alter actions so that your life is reflective of what's important to you. And I almost think that that's the most important thing, this idea of what's important to you, and then the information. I want to talk to the thing about Peggy said knowing, and about where every penny is. It is very adversarial, right? Oh my gosh, where's that one penny going? Where's that dollar going? Where's that, $100 going? That's not what this is about. This is about knowledge. But the reality is that knowing where every penny is going isn't necessarily the knowledge that you need. The knowledge that you need is this idea of what's important to you in your life. And then can we set a goal to get there? And then what actions, knowing this foundation, can we take to get to this place? And then your budget then becomes a tool, because in the back of your head, this is what's important and this is where I see myself. And like I said, then you have all the freedom to do the thing and to have the life that you want. And I would love to find the study, but I remember reading years ago that studies do say that people who know where every penny is have less of a chance of achieving financial goals, because they haven't stepped back and looked at the big picture and then used these things to fit into their goals, which is an interesting concept, I think.
My question is, I guess, if you're focusing too much on, are you saying like if you focus too much on where each penny is, you're not focusing enough on what you even want to
What's
do?
important to you. That's right.
Yeah.
What's important to you, right? And if you can decide what's important to you, then I think this idea of sticking to a budget goes away, because it's the place that allows you to move towards what's important to you, and not to stick to a budget, but to move a direction.
Well, right. You just flipped your budget, right? You just
Yeah.
flipped it from this negative to this tool that's going to help you achieve what's important to you.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
instead of limiting yourself in this negative space of, oh my gosh, I can't have that because I'm going to blow my budget, you have now decided that your budget is going to help you get from here to there.
Right.
And so it becomes a positive thing. Yeah.
Yeah, positive, right.
So it makes a huge difference. It's all, your perspective and you, again, your life and how you spend your money.
Yeah, right. It's just a tool. Don't make it more important than it is. It's just a tool.
Right.
And at the end, right, it is your life. It's what it's all about. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to One Went the Other Way, a podcast about your journey and finances. If you'd like to schedule an appointment with us, you can find us at financesforreallife.com. It'll also be in the show notes. We post episodes to this podcast every 2 weeks. We hope to see you in the next episode. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advice offered through Finances for Real Life, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision.